What it do, NMA crew? Hey man, listen, today I'm gonna be ranting about two albums that were requested of me on Patreon. This rant request was from Funky Boy Haas, who asked me to rant about I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside by Earl Sweatshirt and Good Kid Mad City by Kendrick Lamar. It's the third Kendrick Lamar album he's had me listen to. Definitely my favorite, by the way. It was easily my favorite Kendrick album and probably my favorite of the two Earl Sweatshirt albums I listened to. So I'm going to be frank here. I was listening to this music while I was delivering pizzas, on the daily grind as usual. I listened to every song on every album, but I wasn't reading along with the lyrics as I was going in. I've only heard it once. I heard some of these songs like last night, so I'm not going to be able to do justice to the level of intentionality that was injected into both of these albums. I know Earl Sweatshirt has like a background in like poetry. I believe his father was a poet. And I just know from talking to people who are huge fans of him that he has an enormous amount of detail put into his music. I even saw a few of the things that he had said in response to people like going on Genius to try to figure out the meanings of his songs and stuff. He seemed really upset that people wouldn't think about it for themselves and really re-listen to it. He mentioned making the album so short so that it would be viable for people to re-listen to it and get more out of it and start to understand it more as they peel back the layers. So keep that in mind. I haven't developed the context to be able to sort of engage with the albums like that. But, I listen to them and I'm just going to give my quick thoughts. First, I'll talk about the Earl Sweatshirt album because that's the one I listened to first. I would say it was more... I almost found it more cutting than the other one that I listened to from him. It was pretty antisocial. I mean, as the title would suggest, but it's very interesting because it seems to have been following the passing of a loved one of his. I believe it was his grandmother, and it was sort of just a extremely blunt look at his depressive mind state after that event happened, and it's pretty comprehensive, honestly, because he goes through a lot of different songs with a lot of different beats and a lot of different tones and a few different features. And he really sort of puts you in his world, puts you in his head, showing you exactly everything that's going through it and all the emotions that he's feeling. They're very, unnerving, kind of eerie production on a lot of these songs. And it's just it's a very interesting, atmospheric album. I wasn't able to super dig into the lyrics, but ostensibly there is a lot of misanthropy going on. He does not like a lot of people, which makes sense because he's 21, I think, when he made this. Bro, I couldn't make something like 1/100th of this good, and I'm 20, so I got 1 year to do a lot of catching up. It's pretty amazing because even I sometimes can look at a lot of other people my age or just in the world in general and be a bit disappointed by the lack of effort they're putting into being a better person or discovering themselves or anything like that, which is pretty pretentious to say, but at the end of the day, it is how I feel sometimes. And I understand that context can complicate things, and not everybody has, for example, as much time for introspection, and some people are in situations where they're just so focused on keep staying alive, living paycheck to paycheck, to where they don't necessarily have as much time for that window of self-reflection. However, there are just a lot of people I know who don't put in the effort and don't really have much of an excuse for it. And I could see how he would feel that, but tenfold, especially after dealing with the passing of somebody. It's tough because depression is something that can be triggered by a ton of things. But really what it does is it just makes your mind look at everything in a different way. So a lot of people, when they're talking about what makes them depressed, they'll bring up a bunch of different factors and phenomenon and experiences they've had or social issues that they're facing, and all of those things are actually contributors to what brought them to the breaking point of just becoming like extremely depressed. But those aren't, and none of those things, a lot of times all of those things can go away, but once you're at the point of depression, it no longer becomes about those things. It's sort of like a chemical problem in your brain, and everything just begins to become more cynical. Everything, you just start to see the, worst sides of every. I mean, if you're like not religious, or if you're just somebody who thinks a lot, or somebody who knows enough about society and history, there was someone in my server who's like a philosophy nerd, and he was telling me about a bunch of different massacres throughout history that I had never heard of. If you're somebody like that who understands the depravity of like humans and like the lows that they're capable of stooping to if they don't check themselves, I can definitely see why. Of course, it's reasonable to be a bit of a hater, It's reasonable to think these things, and that's why it's such a hard trap to break out of, because when you're depressed, you might start to ruminate on these things more, but it's hard to get yourself to snap out of it, because a lot of times the things aren't untrue. There are a lot of things to be really upset about in this world, and it's just really fucked. It's really unfair, and sometimes it can feel like you're running away from the problems by not being absorbed by them. Of course, like, if you let depression absorb you and that stops you from being a moral agent in society and bettering yourself and helping the people around you, and it just sort of paralyzes you, that's a bad thing, obviously. But it can be hard to take that step into donning a more positive outlook when it just feels so fake. It can kind of just make you want to give up on the whole thing, is what I would say. And he definitely in this album was giving that impression. He was like hopelessly depressed, definitely communicating emotions of just like being extremely far gone at this point, not wanting anything to do with anyone, and just basically like airing out his mind. When I was super depressed, I wasn't able to really think things through that much, and I remember there were so many times where I don't really have any experience making art in the way I want to, but I wanted to write something about my depression, and there was a point where I couldn't think. I couldn't think straight because it was just so overwhelming in my mind, and there was no way that I was going to be able to eloquently and artfully communicate the feelings inside. I just desperately needed to write down everything I thought about the world, which was all directed at myself. I actually don't relate to being mad at people that much. I understand it because of the things I've mentioned. Humans can stoop to incredibly low points if they don't check themselves, and people just walk around not checking themselves all the time, unknowingly feeding into extremely problematic and immoral systems, But I've always blamed myself. I've always had remarkably low self-esteem. I've always had like really, really, really pronounced thoughts of self-loathing, self-hatred, and that's sort of another thing that he touches on in this album, for sure, which is another layer to the antisocial stuff, because you want to believe that people aren't worthy of your company, or that you're not going to get anything out of being around people, because if there are people who are better or more moral than you, that's obviously also going to make you feel like shit. Like, the second you start weighing everybody on a scale of like morality and who's a good person, all that, it can really just get fucked right away. It's just a bad headspace to be in, because like you can engage with that idea healthily, but it all just comes back to the fact that when you're depressed, bro, everything's just going to reinforce that. It takes a remarkable amount of self-awareness and time to be able to gain the perspective to sort of crawl yourself out of it. And this was therapeutic for him. If he was going through loss, he needed to feel these emotions out. He needed to say all of these true things. And that's not to trivialize them. That's not to say that they aren't things that actually demand change. That's not to say that maybe some of the things he said about himself aren't things that he should still, inspect and try to get to the emotional root of. But I just think it's necessary. Sometimes you need that artistic release, even if it is very blunt, even if it is just like, I don't like shit, I don't go outside. I remember in my notes app, there's so many things, just horrible things, just absolutely horrible things I would say about myself. And on one hand, that's bad. It's bad to like subconsciously reinforce negative notions about yourself by verbalizing and then like reading them and like physically manifesting them into the world, whether it be on your phone or on like pen and paper. But at the same time, it's a needed catharsis because it can allow you to lay out and examine exactly what's going through your head when it's all just moving so fucking fast. There's so many things coming at you. They all suck. They all blend together. When you get depressed, your hippocampus like shrinks and it's harder to pull from both your long and short-term memory. It becomes much harder to focus. You oftentimes develop like ADHD-like symptoms, and it's just fucking terrible, really. I'm just kind of getting off in the weeds here. I'm basically just talking about depression at this point, but I found it to be the album to be a very good depiction of what it feels like with the sort of ideas flowing by so fast. A lot of like the more aggressive and like caustic delivery, and then more of the like laid back, subdued, more tired, almost droning stuff that would happen sometimes. It's overall a pretty to the point album. I really liked it. I liked that it was like mood swings. He had some songs that were like angry. He had some songs that were mopey. That sounds really dismissive. But he did. He had some songs that were mopey, some songs that were angry, some songs that were a little bit more hopeful. And then, he had some features. He would sometimes big himself up. He would sometimes talk about the things that trouble him when it comes to his own self-image. It was just a very well-rounded view on his entire depression that I feel like was so raw that he had to have written it while he was still depressed, but at the same time had enough perspective to where either he's just an insane fucking genius or he had to have been slowly getting over it, or he has to have gotten over a similar cycle in the past to be able to have this level of perspective on it. I think that it's important to have that artistic outlet, and I think the album probably helped him a great deal. It's very concerning stuff to hear because it's honest. He's just saying what's in his head. He's going through loss. It's a fucked up world. I totally understand it, and I respect the hell out of the album. I'm going to be honest. The other one was Good Kid, M.A.A.d City by Kendrick Lamar. This was my favorite Kendrick Lamar album. I don't even want to talk about it that much because there's clearly so much lyrical content. There are multiple times throughout the album where he basically states, like, reread this shit. You'll find gold mines in these lines in the song that he did with Drake. There's just so much he goes through. It seems like, in a lot of ways, from my very limited understanding of Kendrick's identity as an artist, like a thesis statement on everything that he's ever been talking about. Because with Damn, he had a lot of the motifs of becoming a worse person and becoming corrupted, and then becoming purified, almost in a religious sense, becoming closer to God, closer to heaven, and sort of like the album could be played either way, going forward or going backwards, showing different sort of character arcs, like a comedy versus tragedy. He has that idea with the title, Good Kid, M.A.A.d City, where he's talking about his home life, which is at times very comforting, and like certain elements of his upbringing that were very like communal and helpful in his development, and that meant a lot to him, but also the elements of it that were absolutely terrible, that kind of pushed him into further considering gang violence, being exposed to death and murder at an early age. There's a lot of stuff about the way he interacts with and treats women, which is also kind of a metaphor for the way he interacts with and treats hip hop, from what I can tell. But it's just a story of the development of a person being corrupted by the system around them. Because if you grow up poor in America in an area with a lot of gang violence, you're basically set up to lose. And it's tough because there are a lot of like strong moral codes, I think, among a lot of people, especially in gangs. You always hear about it, even in like TV shows and shit. A lot of them have like really pronounced morals. A lot of them have a profound sense of community, but at the same time, there are things that you just can't like that's sort of the community that you're given, and you can't just abandon that. You can't just be like, oh, okay, yeah, well, I'm done with all the gangbanging. I don't even, that's just not who I am anymore. No, you're the same person. You could still be a good kid who went through both corruption and growth at the same time, and you don't just have to abandon all of that because it happens to be what you were born into. There are good things about these communities. There are good things that they did for Kendrick. It's just it's a very difficult act to sort of disentangle the good from the bad, and you can tell he's really making an effort. He just seems like such an empathetic guy. He's trying his best, man. He's just trying his best, but he's very traumatized. You know, he's very hurt. He has picked up like very violent tendencies that he would probably admit are extremely like antisocial and dysfunctional, but you know, that's just the way he is, and you kind of got to learn to accept yourself in spite of that. There's a sort of love he mentions when he says that it's not just a verb. This is one of the times in the album where he emphasizes, please re-listen to this line. He says, love's not just a verb. I don't remember the rest of the line, but the tenor of it was basically like, there is a more all-encompassing love. I believe it was something of a religious statement, I would say, but it also kind of applies to the self, you know. Obviously, there are tons of songs, tons of stories, tons of think pieces, tons of everything about how important self-love is, but it kind of has to be, you know, a holistic thing. It's better to seek understanding of why you have the tendencies you have and to try to get like a handle on them than to, you know, say like, oh, this dude's a good person, he's a good kid, this dude's a good kid, he's a bad kid. It's all fucking so gray, you know, because you could be born a certain way, you can fall into certain circumstances that you fight like hell to get yourself out of, and it's just, there are so many different types of people where, I guess I'll rephrase it as, the same type of person can be placed in two different situations, two different like living arrangements, even both within America. It doesn't have to be like that geographically far apart, and they will turn out to become entirely different people. And that has nothing to do with who they are at their core. It's just important to understand that and move forward using the good of what you've learned, and just trying to find a way to accept yourself and to find other people to accept and uplift. It's the story of basically fighting to be a good person when there's a system trying to turn you into a violent and antisocial borderline sociopath is how I would describe it. So it's very interesting, very good 2 albums. Like I said, this was just from like some gleaming listens in the car. I wasn't able to like re-listen. I wasn't able to actually reread almost any of the lyrics. I looked at like 2 of the songs, 2 from like the first album, 1 from the Kendrick album. It was really good. This is my favorite album recommendations. I think I've said that a couple times. Maybe it's just recency bias. Like every time I finish one, I'm like, yeah, that was really good. But I enjoyed it. I'm becoming more and more of a fan of Kendrick Lamar. I feel like he's just really honest. I feel like a lot of people aren't willing to accept the evil parts of themselves or the parts that they don't see as their true self. Even though it's all red, like none of it's actually there's, in my opinion, I'm not religious, I don't think there's any such thing as your true self. You are a collection of your experiences and a collection of traits and behaviors and actions and choices that you've made throughout your life. So it's just sort of reductive and counterintuitive to boil people down to a good person or a bad person. I feel like it's much more important to be able to understand the actual mechanisms that got them to the place that they were at and where to move forward from there. I don't think judging is, I mean, like sometimes judgments have to be made, but I just don't think being judgy is ever good. And it's the mark of a very empathetic person is what I would say. Because like, okay, I keep going on about this, but to be an empathetic person is to want to understand, to not want to write people off, to not want to put people into boxes because you put yourself into their shoes. You don't want to be put in a box, obviously. You know, you get put in a box your whole life. It's your house. It's your city. It's your house is literally a fucking box. Like you are influenced to be a certain way just by the circumstances you were born in. And if you don't like that, and you see parts of yourself that you don't like, you see parts of yourself that are dysfunctional, you don't want to box anybody else into like a role or anything, because then, you know, they're just in the bucket. They're just, you know, they're not malleable. They can't be changed. They can't grow. And that's just a really hurtful thing to do to somebody, in my opinion. And even if it's not actually like, it doesn't matter, it's just some people that wouldn't listen to you anyway and that you're not going to interact with much, it's a personal thing. It's like you can't bring yourself to do it. Just like writing someone off as a person is, it's just painful. It's painful because it's almost like you're admitting defeat, admitting that you yourself aren't as capable of change as you thought. Oh, yeah, it's just rough. I don't know. I relate to the idea of being really empathetic. But yeah, I liked the Kendrick album. I liked the Earl album. It was all really good. M.A.A.d signing out.